Thank you, Kieran, very much indeed for that kind introduction, and it's wonderful to be here. I thought I would just start, because of being in this extraordinary and wonderful and phoenix-like building, by just reading a quote from the historian Lord Macaulay in the 19th century, which I think serves as a useful theme for what I'm going to be talking about tonight. He said that we see in almost every part of the annals of mankind how the industry of individuals, struggling up against wars, taxes, famines, conflagrations, mischievous prohibitions, and more mischievous protections, creates faster than governments can squander and repairs whatever invaders can destroy. And we're certainly standing in a building that has been repaired, whatever invaders destroyed. My previous 4 books about human nature have really argued that there is such a thing as human nature, that it's kind of the same all over the world and has been the same in history and so on. And I still think that's true, and I'm not going to depart from that a bit. But I believe if you go back and met Shakespeare, or you go back 10,000 years and met somebody painting a picture on the wall of a cave, you would be able to understand his personality. You would understand why he got angry. You'd understand why he smiled. You'd understand why he was jealous or in love or something like that. Those kind of things don't change. Of course, there are overlays of culture on them, but there is a theme of human nature that runs through human society. And yet, something does change. I mean, you only have to look out of the window here to see that something spectacular has changed in the last 100, 200 years. And that's only the final flourish of something that's been happening for hundreds of thousands of years. And that's really what I want tonight's talk and the book to be about, is how does this headlong process of cultural change happen to our species, and what is it? So how did we go from making these to making these, essentially? These are both real objects. They sit on my desk at home. It's not a fake photograph, although I have blotted out the logo on the mouse. The similarity is, in a way, not interesting, because it just tells you that they're both designed for the human hand. But the one on the left was made to exactly the same design. It's an Australian hand axe from about 500,000 years ago. It was made to exactly the same design for 1,000,000 years. Well, not exactly, but to pretty well the same design. These things don't change much over 1,000,000 years. So we had technology, but we didn't change it much. But nowadays, the thing on the right is already obsolete within a few years. And that's what I want to try and understand. So here's the elevator pitch, the brief summary of the talk, so you can get an idea of where I'm going at each stage. I'm going to argue that things are getting better. People are actually getting nicer as a result. That'll be a tough one, but I'll have a go. And the reason is because everybody's increasingly working for everybody else, and that's the great story of human history, which is a habit that started pretty well exactly roughly 120,000 years ago. And that the way it works is that exchange had the same impact on cultural evolution that sexual reproduction had on biological evolution. And I'll explain what I mean by that when we get to it. It leads to some kind of collective brain, whereby the knowledge of how to run society is not in anyone's brain. It's distributed among everybody's brains. As a result of which, I'm going to argue, we ain't seen nothing yet. There's some extraordinary changes to come in human society. And those who say it's all going to go to hell in a handbasket very quickly, I think they're going to be wrong. And I'll try and persuade you of all those propositions in the next 40, 50 minutes. Let me just quickly, though, say what I'm not saying, because it's important to understand that I'm not saying everything's fine. Quite the reverse. I'm saying there's still a lot wrong with the world, but there's a lot that could be put right. And things are certainly not as good as they can be. Nor am I saying that nothing's getting worse. There are all sorts of trends that are going in the wrong direction, inevitably, and there will be. Nor am I particularly saying everything's going to be fine in this country or in my country. Actually, if you look at the impact of the debts that we're taking on in some Western countries, I'm not a great optimist about the next 10 years or the next 50 years in Western Europe or North America. But I'm talking about the globe. And I'm certainly not telling you to kind of feel good about things. This isn't about... In fact, in many ways, people are too optimistic about their own lives. They tend to predict that they're going to stay married longer than they do, for example. Because nobody gets married expecting it to only last 10 years. And there's a sort of genre of books which tells you to sort of love your cancer or something like that. This isn't one of those, I promise. Macaulay again, he said in 1830, on what principle is it that when we see nothing but improvement behind us, we are to expect nothing but deterioration before us? That was in 1830. There's been quite a lot of improvement since then, I will argue. So here's a few examples of how things are getting better. Life expectancy. In my lifetime, up roughly a third. Doubled in 200 years. We're adding life expectancy. This is globally. This isn't the US or anything like that. This is the world as a whole. We're adding life expectancy at the rate of about 5 hours a day, which is quite a thought. World product. That's the value of goods and services that we produce in the world at a constant, corrected for inflation. Gone up quite fast quite recently. Poverty. This is the latest data on the amount of poverty in the world. It's a pretty steep decline and a pretty steady one. There are various different ways of measuring poverty. Pinkowski and Sally Martin's way is different from other people's, but they're all going down. And if you look at the graph of world growth as opposed to growth in any one country, it's remarkably steady. It shows much less of the ups and downs that you find in other in individual countries. You can see recessions. Those are world recessions. But there are only pauses in the upward progress of the graph. Air pollution, halved in this country in the last 30 years for all these different air pollutants. Well, here's a trendy one, oil pollution. I'm certainly not here to claim that it's a good thing that there is a slick in the Gulf of Mexico, let alone that things are improving down there. Quite the reverse. It's a terrible, terrible disaster that's happening down there. But it's worth noting that the total amount of oil spilled, this is from tankers, not from rigs, but if you add in rigs, the picture is very similar, has been going down quite steeply. And the biggest rig spill in the Gulf of Mexico in 1979 was so big that if the current one is to match it, it's got to go on for about 2 years. So, it's terrible, but it's not, the general trend, accidents aside, tends to be improving. So if we can learn from this and make sure it doesn't happen again, then maybe we can make sure even that doesn't happen again. Death rates from water-related diseases in America, largely extinct. Clean water. Death rates from tuberculosis, measles and scurvy. Other causes of death. Well, obviously we're not wiping them out as fast as we're wiping out infectious diseases, but accidents are down, heart disease is down, cancer's steady. That's not all that surprising. We're getting older. We should be getting more cancer, but there's no sign of a great cancer epidemic caused by chemicals, which a lot of people predicted in the 70s and 80s. And the AIDS epidemic zooms into the picture in the 90s and then has got considerably better since. So just a summary of how much better the world is in some things that really matter in my lifetime. Since 1955, well, I was born in 1958, but my numbers are from 1955. Life expectancy is up a third. Per capita income has trebled. This is all across the world, remember. Food per capita is up a third. Child mortality is down 2/3. That's an incredible achievement. And the population growth rate has halved in my lifetime. That's another thing a lot of people forget. The percentage increase in population has actually halved. So, is this all at the expense of coarseness and unkindness? Well, I would argue not. The homicide rate's gone down pretty steeply since the Middle Ages. The rate of death in warfare, it was pretty high in the 20th century, but if you compare it with the rate of death in warfare in hunter-gatherer societies, it was about 1/10 of that. So although the 20th century was not a great century for violence, the general trend has again been downwards. This is a picture of one of my ancestral relations, a chap called Bishop Ridley, being very, very slowly and deliberately burned to death from the feet upwards for the crime of believing that at the communion the bread is figuratively but not literally the body of Christ. And there's a lot of very posh people sitting around watching and enjoying the spectacle, and that's entertainment in the 16th century. It's unimaginable today.